Welcome to Illuminating Health, the UCSF School of Nursing's podcast that sheds light on health and healthcare issues affecting our daily lives. My name is Carly Mariano, a current student in the UCSF PhD nursing program, and today I'm joined by Dr. Sandra Weiss and Dr. Cherry Leung, faculty and nurse scientists in the UCSF School of Nursing. Thank you both for joining today's episode.
My pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
You've likely noticed a surge in microbiome consumer products over the last decade, things like probiotic sodas, supplements, and skincare products. As interest in gut health, skin health, and overall mental well being has grown, the term microbiome has become more common in our day to day. But what exactly is the human microbiome? And how does it impact our physical and mental health? Sandra and Cherry are nurse scientists who lead research on the microbiome, investigating not only how the microbiome impacts human health, but how understanding the microbiome can help us treat or even prevent certain health conditions. Sandra and Cherry, we're excited to learn more about your work. To ensure we have a foundation for our conversation, Sandra, please help us understand what is the microbiome.
Well, that's a tall order, Carly, but I'll give it a stab. So, the human microbiome is the complete collection of microorganisms and their genes that live in a specific environment, such as our gut or our skin or other areas of the body. And these tiny organisms can be bacteria, they can be fungi, or viruses. And they live in communities just like people. And we, as humans, serve as a host for their communities. Now, these microorganisms play essential roles in determining our health. For example, in producing nutrients like essential vitamins or even neurotransmitters, as well as a role in managing our immune response. So, the microbiome, as you might expect, includes DNA and RNA of these microorganisms. They have their own genomes just like we do. And there are different types, of course, of microorganisms. Some are beneficial, and these are called commensal, or they can be pathogenic, contributing to physical or mental health problems. And it's often the particular diversity of the organisms and how well they're balanced in our bodies, or it can be the abundance of certain types of organisms that can make all the difference in whether we're healthy or vulnerable to particular illnesses or health problems. Hope that helps a little bit, Carly.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's important in determining, the fact that there, like most things, are good and bad parts of the microbiome. You both conduct research on the gut microbiome, which is sometimes called a second brain. And Cherry, why is it called that?
Yeah, Carly. So that's a great question, and actually along the lines of my research work. So the gut is called the second brain because it has its own nervous system, and this is called the enteric nervous system. This system contains hundreds of millions of neurons, which is actually a lot more than that of the spinal cord. So, what's remarkable is that it can function independently, thus given the nickname the second brain. And then at the same time, it's in constant communication with the brain. And that back and forth is what's called the gut brain axis. So, this communication happens through several different pathways. The first is through the vagal nerve, which is kind of a superhighway carrying messages directly from the gut to the brain. And then another is the immune system, where the gut microbes can trigger or calm inflammation, which in turn affects brain function and our mood. And then the third is the hormonal pathway, often called the HPA axis, which governs our stress response. Signals from the gut can influence cortisol and other stress hormones, creating a feedback loop between the gut and the brain. And on top of all of this, the gut itself produces many of the same chemical messengers as the brain. For example, about 90% of the body's serotonin, which is important for mood regulation, is actually made in the gut. So when we call the gut the second brain, it's not just a catchy phrase. It reflects the biological conversation between the gut and the brain through nerves, the immune system, and hormones. And I think we've all felt this before. Those butterflies in your stomach before a big event or presentation is really the brain talking to our gut. It also works the other way, where changes in the gut can also send signals back to the brain, shaping our mood, stress, and even behavior.
Oh, that's super interesting. The butterfly in the stomach comment definitely makes me feel seen being a PhD student. I think it's really interesting that it's called the second brain just because it has so much to offer, but seems like a fairly novel field of study in the last decade or so. And why do you think, if it is so impactful in our day to day operation, why do you think it's just now kind of coming to the forefront and definitely being commercialized?
Well, I think one has to be the technology for one thing, analyzing and figuring out which gut microbes are within the gut or within any other parts of the body. Maybe the technology was not as advanced, and also the cost of things, have changed a lot. Work on the gut microbiome has been out there, but we're just really starting to think about how these microbiological systems affects the human system.
Thank you so much. That's a really great answer. Which kind of brings me to my next question for you, Sandra. You've led a distinguished research career that has profoundly influenced our understanding on how genetics and psychological factors interact to impact mental health. Can you tell us a bit more about your research journey and what brought you to study the microbiome?
Well, thank you for your nice comments, Carly. Appreciate that. I've been interested in the intersection between biological and psychological factors since the beginning of my career as a nurse. In the clinical area, I found myself always considering like how the patient's emotional status was affecting their physical health, just as an example. And then when I went through a PhD program in biological and developmental psychology at UC Berkeley, that furthered my interest in connecting these two spheres, that's the biological and the psychological, especially for children's health. And my initial research was looking at how the specific ways that parents touch their children were associated with the children's motor and cognitive development, as well as how a child's neural sensitivity to touch, that's used by health professionals, nurses in particular, in care, might influence the child's health and well being. Well, at that time, I focused especially on preterm infant health, since these babies often have sensitivities to environmental stimulation as a result of their underdeveloped nervous systems at birth. Well, over time, my interest in nervous system response narrowed to a focus on the preterm infant's stress regulation and factors that might influence both development of the autonomic nervous system and the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. These are two of the primary stress response systems that Cherry mentioned a little bit ago. And I was just starting up a new NIH grant that was examining the role of stress related hormones and maternal depression during pregnancy and the postpartum on preterm infant stress regulation. When I heard a talk at a developmental psychobiology conference on the microbiome and the gut brain axis. Well, I was totally captivated by the possibility that the microbiome might be a key mechanism that influenced stress regulation of infants through effects during fetal development, especially. And I'd like to just say on the side here that I think in our careers, in all of our research careers, those of us who are starting and those of us who are in the middle, the end, these types of exciting challenges or interesting intellectual um, ideas that we're exposed to are so important. And being able then to see, well, how might that be incorporated into my own work? And I just encourage everybody who's listening to be open to those possibilities because it can make a huge difference on keeping your work cutting edge, making sure that you're truly addressing the most important things that you might, etc. I created a pilot study based on that excitement I felt after hearing about the microbiome to examine the links that I thought might be important between the microbiome and stress regulation. And that pilot was funded by other sources, but then I linked it to my larger NIH grant, and that was the start of my focus on the microbiome. Well, just to say, and then I'll wind up, that findings from that pilot were very surprising since they suggested something I had not hypothesized at all, that mild to moderate stress exposure of the fetus in utero could actually be associated with a microbial environment in early life that's more optimally prepared to thrive in a stressful postnatal environment. Now, who would have thought that that might be a possibility? We sort of expected negative kinds of things. So, based on that, we've hypothesized that adaptation of gut microbiota under conditions of stress, now this is mild, moderate stress, not toxic or extreme stress, may actually involve upregulation of certain protective microorganisms, such as bifidobacteria, as well as downregulation of potential pathogens like Bacteroides. And that might occur through epigenetic or other processes within the fetal neonatal gut brain axis. So that was very exciting, that pilot study, and it got me moving forward in the microbiome arena.
Well, thank you so much. I actually, being your mentee, have not heard kind of your journey, so that was really fun to hear. And I think it just goes speaks to the fact that you have taught me a lot about intersection and how everything kind of plays off of each other. And so it's always really neat to hear how you link these hypotheses. Obviously, you're conducting research right now on the infant microbiome, and can you tell us more about that work and what you're hoping to learn?
So the pilot study I mentioned was the basis for a larger grant, specifically looking at the ways in which exposure to specific stress-related hormones in the womb, the baby, the fetus's exposure, as well as exposure to mother's stress and depression during pregnancy, might actually influence the baby's microbiome after birth. And now this with the larger grant proposal was an attempt to have a large sample, as large as we could get, much more than the pilot study allowed for. And we were fortunate to receive NIH funding for this research effort. And just to say too that as we move into these new areas in our research work, um, one of the beauties of a place like UCSF or any research intensive university is that there are specialists in varied areas that are right there for us to collaborate with. And I had the pleasure of then reaching out to Susan Lynch, who's a microbiome expert, and the two of us worked together in development of this grant so that we were each bringing and still are very different areas of expertise. And I see that in all of our meetings that we have, building on one another's expertise, and it's marvelous. But so in this research, we're looking at how specific microbiota might not only be affected by what I told you in pregnancy, but in turn, they might be associated then with the infant's ability to regulate stress and regulate emotions in early life. In addition, we want to learn how specific microbiota that are transmitted from the mom to the baby through what's called vertical transmission. It's a big term. And when I was just starting in the field, I thought, vertical transmission, what is this? But how we're looking at how that may influence the infant microbiome after birth and infant stress regulation. So, vertical transmission is this process whereby the infant's microbiome is colonized by maternal vaginal bacteria during passage through the birth canal. So it's very exciting. The fact that we're able to look at this kind of transmission is just really spectacular in understanding the fetal process and what can happen between pregnancy and birth. So all of these questions also involve looking at the genes and gene pathways of the microbiome and their role in all of this too. So as you can see, I'm I'm very, very excited about all this, and we're just now starting to analyze some of the data from this major study.
That's great. And I love to hear the excitement come through. Research is exciting. So, um, Cherry, you take it up to the old adolescents here. So you're leading a study that explores the use of probiotics in treating adolescent depression. So a little bit different. What inspires you to explore probiotics as a possible treatment for adolescent depression?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Carly. I'd love, to share my work. So what really inspired me to explore probiotics as a possible treatment for teen depression is the growing evidence that the gut and the brain are deeply connected. So we know that depression can first appear during adolescence, where the brain is still actively developing, and when stress and inflammation can have long-lasting effects. And research is showing that the gut microbiome can modulate these effects. So, this is where probiotics come in. Probiotics are essentially beneficial bacteria, and research on adults suggests that they may help restore balance in the gut microbiome. Some studies in adults show that certain probiotics or bacteria, like lactobacillus or bifidobacterium, again, some bacteria that you've heard that are found in yogurt, can reduce stress, lower inflammation, and even improve mood. So, despite the fact that these probiotics can be found pretty much everywhere from your grocery store to your pharmacy, we still don't know which brands or which specific strains of bacteria are most effective for mental health, especially in teens. So, our team saw an opportunity. If probiotics can gently shift the gut environment in a healthier direction, they might also influence the brain and support mental health in a way that's safe, low cost, and easy to deliver and pretty easy to purchase as well. So that doesn't mean that probiotics are a replacement for existing treatments like therapy or medication for teen depression, but they can be used as an additional tool. So one that might be particularly appealing to families, looking for supportive and accessible options with limited to no side effects. And for me, the excitement is in bringing together what we know about microbiology, psychiatry, and adolescent development to ask something as simple as, can a probiotic help support teens' mental health at a really vulnerable time? And if so, which ones are the most beneficial?
That's really interesting. And I think having a teenager in my house, getting them to eat more is a lot easier than getting them to, do many of the other options that come with mental health in terms of time and effort it might take. And it's great that it could potentially be an adjunct to, improved mental health. Can you walk us through how you designed that study and what you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but what you really hope to learn from this work?
So this probiotic study is to really explore the connection between the adolescent gut microbiome and depression. So this study is a double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized controlled trial. That means that neither the participants nor the researchers know who's receiving the probiotic or the placebo, which helps to ensure that the results are unbiased. And we're focusing on teens and young adults between 15 and 24 because this is a critical window when depression often first appears. The brain is developing, and we also know that the gut microbiome of adolescents and youth differ from that of adults. Participants are randomly assigned to receive either a multi-strain probiotic called Visbiome or a placebo. And Visbiome has been heavily researched in other populations and other health outcomes, and in general, it's very safe to take. It's been researched in pediatric populations as well. So both groups take their science supplement twice daily for 8 weeks once they're in the study. And this allows us to see whether the probiotic can make measurable changes over a relatively short but meaningful period of time, and that's 8 weeks. And so we're really looking at two main outcomes. The first is brain function. We use functional MRI scans to measure changes in the left hippocampus, a part of the brain closely linked to mood regulation. And second, we do examine the gut microbiome as well. And participants, in order to do so, participants provide stool samples at the beginning and at the end of the study. And then we analyze to see how the bacterial community in the gut may change with probiotic use. I also want to point out that safety is a top priority. Although Visbiome has few side effects, which is typically limited to gassiness the first few days of starting our study, we do track side effects throughout the study. So this study can help answer some really important questions. First, can probiotics support emotional well-being in teens? Um, which changes in the gut are linked to improvements in mood? And could probiotics become a helpful addition to existing treatments like therapy or medication during this important critical period of life?
Again, I love being able to interview both of my mentors and really learn what they're doing. It's really exciting and inspiring. It's clear from what you've both stated that the microbiome has big implications for how we treat and prevent certain health conditions. How might your current projects influence patient care?
My goal is to really try to identify how certain bacteria in the baby's gut can either increase or reduce their risk for problems like stress regulation. Through, as I mentioned, the potential influence they might have on development of that HPA axis or autonomic nervous system, which are, again, our two primary stress response systems. And animal research has shown that microbial colonization and diversity appear essential to the regulation of the stress response. This is what really got me um, moving in my first grant about this, with hypotheses to build on animal models, which were so interesting and really informed the directions we might go. So, for humans, by understanding the types of bacteria that foster optimal development of the HPA axis and the autonomic nervous system, we can then prescribe, as Cherry was talking about, specific prebiotics or probiotics during pregnancy that can foster optimal development of these systems. Or we can create treatment protocols for infants that help to balance any kind of alterations in their microbiome after birth. And Cherry, you might have referred to this a little bit, but just to say again that the probiotics that we would give as preventatives or treatment would be live microorganisms, and they would be specific to the kinds of findings that are coming out of our research. And then the prebiotics are like nutrients such as dietary fiber that can really help these organisms that we want to nourish grow and thrive. And so those can be targeted, both of those, to specific microbiota and then help restore microbial balance. And such interventions can be used to promote a healthier gut in the baby and, in turn, more effective stress regulation. And that kind of work is not only relevant to clinicians, such as nurses, of course, but also for parents and educating parents to foster their knowledge of specific things that can help establish a healthy microbiome, both for the mom and for the infant during pregnancy and the postpartum. Because I've talked mostly about the baby, but we are also studying the mom's microbiome in this current research, and how important that is to her mental health. For instance, we just found that a certain bacteria, Prevotella, is linked to suicidal ideation in moms during pregnancy. And so these kinds of findings have real huge implications for how we might address some of the risks for depression or suicide for mothers, as well as then, of course, for the baby.
So on my end, I think I've been talking a lot about my probiotic study, but in terms of my research on the gut microbiome of adolescents, it's also really focuses on the insights from the gut microbiome and how it can directly inform teen mental health care. So, as I previously briefly mentioned, therapy and medications can be effective for many teens, but some don't always respond fully, or they face barriers to access. So, by exploring the gut microbiome and these new opportunities that we know influence mood and whether probiotics can safely support brain and emotional function, we hope to offer clinicians additional evidence based options to complement standard treatments. This research, I hope, also could have a real impact by helping clinicians personalize interventions. We might not be there yet, but are identifying patterns in the gut microbiome that indicate which teens are more likely to benefit from specific supportive strategies, like dietary adjustments or adjunctive probiotic use. And this can allow for treatments to be tailored for each teen's needs rather than relying solely on standard approaches. And this is, for the future. The main goal is to make adolescent mental health care more accessible and more responsive to individual differences, giving families, teens, clinicians practical, evidence informed options to improve outcomes or reduce depression symptoms.
Thank you so much. I think both of what you're doing really speaks to the spectrum of science, which goes from basic science, bench research, lab based work, all the way through to eventually impacting the patient, which is obviously the goal. And it's great to hear that both of you are moving that forward. And when you kind of look down the road 5 years from now, what do you hope the future of microbiome research will be?
We still don't fully understand which specific microbes or microbial patterns are most important for mental health care. So, as we move forward, my hope is that research will also explore how probiotics is not only a treatment, but probiotics and maybe other microbiome based strategies can be used for prevention. So, if we can identify safe, accessible interventions that reduce the risk of depressive symptoms before they take hold, that can really have a profound impact on adolescent health. I also hope this work will contribute to more personalized mental health care so that one day we might be able to recommend targeted interventions for each individual teen rather than, relying on this one size fits all treatment. And finally, I hope microbiome research will help shift how we think about mental health more broadly, highlighting the role of biology, microbiology, diet, things we consume, and nutrition, and the gut microbiome axis in supporting emotional well being. So, my vision is that clinicians, healthcare providers, researchers, will have more tools and provide families with more options and teens with more hope for managing and even preventing depressions in ways that are safe and effective.
Yes, that was fantastic, Cherry. And in some ways, I could say a ditto. I agreed with everything that you said. There is, and especially, by the way, about the precision health piece. I do think that this offers an opportunity for us to move in that direction so that care can be individualized. Because we know that even though there might be specific types of microbiota that are linked in general in populations to outcomes, one of the beauties of this kind of work is to be able to look at, well, how do factors moderate that? Factors specific to the demographics of the patient or their environmental context that they're living in, their history. So all of these things really, I think, make a difference and can improve health of our patients over time. I also say there is so much evidence that the early microbiome, which is where my greatest interest lies, establishes this foundation for later health in multiple areas. And so, for instance, we already know from research that vaginal deliveries, in contrast to cesarean, and breastfeeding can enhance diversity in the infant's microbiome. It allows for the opportunity to be more balanced and respond to immune challenges and other kinds of crises that come up for us as humans. So that diversity really seems to be enhanced by breastfeeding as well as vaginal delivery. while the shorter time in gestation and then preterm birth have been, in contrast, shown to disrupt development of that diverse microbiome. So, as I look forward, I would really like to see the field have a better understanding in the same way as we know about some of those factors of how exposure to certain bacteria can increase or reduce this risk for stress regulation challenges and problems in the baby. And then those challenges in stress regulation, how they influence overall health across the lifespan, because that ability to regulate stress is just critical to both the future mental and physical health of all human beings. Since life is filled with stressors, and our physiologic and psychological regulation of the emotions surrounding the stressors we experience is just fundamental to well-being throughout life.
Well, thank you both so much, both Sandra and Cherry. It's been really fun being the one to get to ask the questions and hear from you both in your areas of expertise. And I'd just like to thank you for joining us on this episode of Illuminating Health today. And thank you to our listeners. And we look forward to connecting with you next time.